Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we must set this Moed Katan daf Yud Beis. We are going to begin on the very top of Yud Beis Madalf, first line. Omer Shmuel, Mekabli Kablonus. So when it comes to a person who is a Kablon is someone who is a contractor who is hired to do a particular job, a specific job for you. And generally speaking, when it comes to an Akum, when it comes to Kablonus, we're more lenient, and because he really works for himself, so when it comes to, for example, on Shabbos, we're going to see that a Kablon has more leniencies when it comes to that Akum working on your behalf, as opposed to a Schir Yom, where you're actually paying him for the day's work, so that becomes more problematic. So the Gemara says, "Mekabloni kablonos b'sochet chum." If you have him, this Akum, that you hired to work for you, and he's within the Tchum, so Aser, he's not allowed to work for you, says Rashi, Litin Malach L'Nachri B'Kablonus. You're not allowed to do so. However, Chutz L'Tchum Mutter. Outside of the Tchum, it is allowed. So Rashi says, V'ha Dishari Beis Hill B'Per Kama D'Shabbos. So in the first parak of Masechet Shabbos, in which is actually a question, Question 2, this is actually TA question 2. Very difficult question because it's only in Rashi, but this is a very important Rashi nonetheless. So the question is, when it comes to the Gemara over there, he says, Litin Kalim Mekayvis, he allows you to put garments and give it to a launderer. Be'erev Shabbos, right before Shabbos, they feel b'toichat chum. So the question is, why? You know he's going to be doing malacha of laundering your clothes. So Rashi says, Mishum tikvisa b'nachri midlo minker. It's not something which is recognizable. V'leika chashada, and therefore there's no chashad. There's no issue when it comes to him doing this for you. So that's why we're lenient. Avol midi de minker b'toichat chum aser mishum chashada. There's an issue of chashad that it looks like you're actually hiring him as a schir yom, and therefore that is the important nafkamina as cited in Rashi. So there's a difference if he's b'toichat chum or chutzot chum. Chutzot chum is mutter. Back in the Gemara, but if he'll chutzot chum, nonetheless, even outside, Lomar, we didn't say it's allowed, El Deleka Masa de Mikarvel Hasam. There's no city that is basically close over there. El Ika Masa de Mikarvel Hasam Aser. So it's again the same issue because people are going to end up possibly going there if it's very close nearby. So because of that, one has to, again, not allow this to be done. Amar Mishar Shevechi Leka Masa de Mikarvel Hasam. Even when there is no other city nearby, the only time we'll say this is on Shabbos and Yom Tov, because a person doesn't travel on Shabbos and Yom Tov, and therefore you're not going to see what this Nachri is doing on your behalf. Again, he's a Kablon, so technically he's working for himself, but again, the chshad is that people think that you hired him as a schir yom. Interestingly enough, we're more strict on Chol HaMoed. So on Chol HaMoed, you're not allowed to hire Kablon to do work for you on Chol HaMoed, because there's a greater likelihood people are going to end up seeing this person working because you're allowed to technically travel on Chol HaMoed. Okay. Marzucher Bered Rav Nachman Banule Apadna Mekabli Kiboilis Chutzot Chum. So when it came to this story of Rav Zutra Bered Rav Nachman, he actually had this building built by these contractors, and it was done chutzot chum, and apparently that's okay. So Iklo Rav Safra Rav Huna Barchinna V'lo Olo Gabe. So they didn't go to him. Hu Namulo Loy Al Gabai. They basically felt that he was doing something wrong. So what's the problem? It's allowed. It was chutzot chum. So my answer is Adam Chashav Shani. A very interesting answer. One of the two Tirutzim, which is question 12 over here. Question 12, he asks, Madua Nimnu Rav Saf Rav Hunul Mulahachnes Lapadna. Why did they refuse to enter into this place? that was built by these contractors, I thought it was allowed. It was allowed because it was chutz l'chum. The answer is, you're right, certain things are allowed, but an adam chashiv is shani. Because when it comes to adam chashiv, even though normally things are allowed, but we have to even go more strict because they're watching an adam chashiv even more scrupulously. Vikid Amri, Siu Messiah Bativna Bahadayu, that he actually helped him and gave him straw for the brick, says Rashi. Shai Noislahem Tevin Malacha, the Hoyel Vahu Messiah Bahadayu Aser. Since Akam didn't do it himself entirely, so it's considered to be Aser, because he could maybe do it, because it was Chutz L'Chum. The fact that you also provided supplies for him on Chol Moed, that became problematic. That was the second answer. Rav Chama, Sharhu Levnegare, the Beresh Kalusa, Lamevaduhu Avidita Bechoda Moada. So he allowed these people, who Rashi says, Misadri Shulchanais, they set up these tables to do their job, says Rashi, Im Nishvar HaShulchan Shar L'Sachnai, that if, let's say, a table broke, they were able to fix it. He said it's okay. The question is why. So Amr, he said, Kivan D'Ager Loika Shakli, because the truth is, the way that they're compensated is will work for food. They're not being compensated with money. Rather, Shirshui Hu Mishar Shurle. Because they're actually being compensated with food, so therefore that is not considered to be an issue. And that's not considered like he was doing malacha for the sake of getting compensated, and therefore that's another heter. Tanaban. Mekamun ki boilis b'moed la'saisel achra moed. You can hire contractors on Chol Moed, but they're not allowed to work now, but you can have them working afterwards. B'moed aser, but they can't actually work on Chol Moed itself. Klol shel davar, the general rule, kol shehu oiseh oimer l'nachri v'oiseh. Anytime you could do it, so a nachri can do it for you also. So there's a whole issue of amir la'akum in Shmir Shabbos is unfortunately quite problematic. People just think you can have an akum do malacha for you, which is clearly not. And this time on Chol Moed, if you can't do the job, then they also can't do it. Tanya idach makalban kibayos b'moed la'saisel achar moed uvad shlo yimdaid ushlo yishgoil ushlo yimon nekaderach shehu oisa b'chol. However, you can't do all the different things like the measuring and the weighing like is done during the weekday. However, you could at least just hire them and you could have them start working afterwards. Tanaban ein marbin behema b'chol shemoed. A person is not allowed to take animals and bring them to a male to a female, or vice versa, by mating them. Kiyotzebo ein marbin b'bechor. A person is not allowed to mate a firstborn animal. Says Rashi Dikavid by malacha, because again that's also malacha. It says you're not allowed to have you're not to do this avoda. V'lo b'psul hamakdoshim. You're also not allowed to have psul mikdoshim as mating. So again, the pasuk says, "My bechor will sabed bechor sherecha." It's not allowed to work. So this is not even a chol moedish; it's just stop. Tanya idach ein marbin behem bechol shemoyed. You can't mate them on chol moed. Yehuda Eimer chamoira shetava. If let's say a donkey which desires warmth, as we've seen in Masechta Shabbos, that donkeys are generally very cold animals by nature. So marbin aleha zachar b'shil shel tetztanin. We allow you to bring a male animal there so it doesn't get too cold. Yishar kol habehemos machnisan oisen lebekaris. All the other animals, then you should bring it into a place where the animals are found, kind of like a barn. And if it decides to mate where it is because there's other animals, if they decide to do this on their own, that's their business, but you shouldn't be the one who initiates it. Tanamanan, ein medairin, a person is not allowed to medairin, which Rashi says machnisin behemol sada, bring animals into a field kadesh yaitzu zevel mazavan hasada, for animals to fertilize the fields. Lo b'shabasais v'lo b'yamim toivim v'lo choshamoid. V'im bo me'aleihin mutter, similar to what we said before. If they come by themselves and fertilize the field, that's okay. However, in Masayinoi son, you cannot support them. Says Rashi, in Masayin lehem lahasiyan mimakum lamakum, to bring them from one place to the next, kadesh tizavel kol sada, so that the whole field should be fertilized. So you can't just like say, oh, you know what, this part of the field has been fertilized, so I'm going to bring these animals from one point to the other. No. Furthermore, v'ein mois lehen shaymer l'nair esaynim, now to appoint a guard to again to l'nair esaynim, to move around these sheep. Rashi says again, lishmer kagon im nachrim heim. That's not allowed. Like to shake them, right, to basically cause the fertilizer, the waste to come out. Hayas schir Shabbos. Let's say again, it's talking about an akum is a schir Shabbos. Shesachur kol shvuel l'dayer sadehu. So you hire him for the week, or let's say for that matter, he says schir chaydesh. You hired him for the month. Schir shana for a year. Schir shavua for the period of Rashi says Shemitah for 7 years, Messiah, so they could do it. Rashi says Ki'ilu shel nachrimhu, because it's Ki'ilu like it's theirs, because they're there for such a long period of time. U'maislahem shaymu l'narasainam, and you can appoint a shaymer to again shake the sheep. Rabbi Omer b'Shabbos b'Toiva, on Shabbos it's b'Toiva. What does that mean? Says Rashi. Im roitze shum adam l'saya oiso, if anyone wants to help them, sacher b'toivaso oisa, then they can do so. Koloimer b'chinam v'loi b'schar. In other words, if another akum wants to do this to help the other akum shepherd, then he can do so, but he has to do it b'chinam. He has to do it for without being paid. B'yomta b'mezainis, b'moed b'schar. But for chol moed, you can pay the akum. Rabbi Yosef, the Hilchos Rabbi, the halacha is like the shita of Rabbi. Weiter. So similar to the previous Mishnah, let's say a person has wine in a pit. V'iru evel or oines, unfortunately this person becomes a mourning or an accident happens. O shetiuhu zoyev v'gaimer v'gaf kedarko. So a person is allowed to complete the process. Rashi says, Koimer Meirik Oisa B'Chavias, the Gafa Chavias B'Gufa Gemura. You can basically cover it up with a regular lid, and that's okay. Div Rav Yosi. Rav Yosi says you can do it without a shinoi. Rabbi Huda Omer Asa Lo B'Mudi Mishvil Shol Yachmetz. You can use a temporary seal, which is a shinoi, so it doesn't become vinegary. Which again, according to the Shita, it's necessary that it must be done with some type of shinoi. Utzricha. Now we need both cases, because this Mishnah was talking about wine, and the Mishnah before that, in the beginning of the parak, talked about oil. Now the Yeshmin and Kamaisa by oil by Hikam Rabbi Yosi. Maybe only there did Rabbi Yosi say they can do it in the normal way. Mishum demishcha nafish psidei. There's, at least those days, oil was very expensive. It was a great financial loss. Havil when it comes to wine, nafish, the low nefesh pseida, for whatever reason, wine then was not as expensive as oil. Same with Rabbi Yehuda, the Shinoi. The Yashmin about Sraisa, but he come Rabbi Yehuda. Maybe only here the Rabbi Yehuda says it should be done with Shinoi because wine is not so expensive. When it comes to oil, and Rabbi Yosi, because it's so expensive, it can be done even without a Shinoi in the normal way. It's Richa. Rabbi Yitzchak Barabba man tanishinu b'moed b'davar ha'aved. Delok Rabbi Yosi, which is the same thing we said previously, that according to Rabbi Yosi, he holds you do not need a shinoi. So the one who says it can only be done with a shinoi is clearly not like Rabbi Yosi. Rabbi Yosi, halacha, Rabbi Yosef, halacha Rabbi Yosi. Halacha is Rabbi Yosi that you do not need to make a shinoi. Bomi name Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Mahu, what is the din? L'meisha chavisa deshichra b'chol demoada. As a person is allowed to let's see if Rashi says, Lameshas Luguf HaChavis, to cover the barrel of beer on Chol HaMoed. So Amalhu Sinai. So what is Sinai? That's another name for Rav Yosef, as Rashi says. Sinai said, the Omer Halach Rav Yosi. So the Halach is Rav Yosi that you're allowed to do it in the normal way. Now Be'emadem Rav Yosi B'chamra. Maybe the only time you allowed you to cover it up in a normal way is dafka with wine. B'shich or miyamar. Who says that? He says it's by beer. So chamra, time of my, why was he leaning by wine? Mishum de nafish pseida, great loss. Shichreinami yismei pseida. There's also a financial loss when it comes to beer being destroyed. Dear Mabaya, amruli aim. My mother said, and of course this is not really his mother because he was adopted, but nonetheless, he treated her always like a mother. Bar shit savi v'tzaye. That which is a bar sheet, Rashi says, let me finish this. Mi bar tamne v'loy tzaye. Says Rashi, climber. Yafa shechar mugaf. Better when you have beer which is covered up. Shemaxach shisha soyin. That is the amount of 6 saw, v'shechar shuba kli gadol, in a very large vat, shemaxach shmoy nesoyim. So it's better that it's covered up than if it's not covered up. Even a small amount. So we see clearly it's a hefsid, it's a loss if it's not covered up properly. Amar Rav Chama bar Guria, Amar Rav, Hilchas Moed ki Hilchas Kutim. The laws of Moed have the same din as Kutim. So the question is, Bahalacha, Lamai Hilchasa. What exactly does this mean? That the dinim of Moed has the same, Chol Moed is the same din of Kuti. So Amar Rav Daniel bar Katina, Amar Rav, Loimer to say, Shehein Akurais, Vein Lamedus Zu Lazu. Basically, it's come to tell you that it's just like a barren woman that, as Rashi says, She'ein lo adam imena pri el gufa. She only has her body, but there's nothing that can come from it. So too, you can't learn out any dinim. What does that mean? Says Rashi, Kashem shezumuteres kach zumuteres kamoi bekusim v'or minin ki heichidim machsek bahai. We don't say that just because it works here or works over there, or in this case, this person, just because the kusi is careful doing certain mitzvos, that means he does other mitzvos. Elo lo yalfi hani mahani. Just because he does one doesn't mean he does the other. So too, just because we matter certain things to Chol Moed doesn't mean you should matter other things to Chol Moed. Dear Shmuel, because after all, look at what Shmuel says. Zoifsin kuta ve'en zoiftin chavisa. A person is allowed to fix, if let's say there's a crack, putting tar on a jug, a small kli, but not a chavisa, not on a large barrel. Rav Dimi min Harda Omer, he says the opposite. He says zoif chavisa ve'en zoiftin kutza. You can fix up a large barrel, but not a small jug. So why can't you learn one out from the other? It's because this is the whole notion of Chol Moed that we can't learn one out from the other. Why? Because Mar chayesh l'pseida, or Mar chayesh l'tircha. One is concerned of the issue of pseida. The one who says Rashi, that zoift in chavisa, that you can fix up this large barrels because he's afraid of pseida. It's a great loss because there's a lot of content inside of a large barrel. So for that, he's concerned. However, when it comes to a kutza, which is not a major loss because it's a small kli, the contents inside is not a lot, so he won't do so. He doesn't allow it. Or he says, no. The reason why I allow you to do the small kli, because this whole issue is tirchi etzera. And a kuza is small, so it's not a big deal to do it. But a chavisa, which is much larger, is a tirchi etzera, and therefore that's not allowed. So question 13, that's what he says. He mutal zefes kli yayin b'moyed u'ma'astad mazeh. So big or small, to malchokas, maybe yes, a big, maybe not a small. It's question is the issue tircha or is the issue pseida? So again, it depends on how you look at it to be able to come up with this conclusion. Amar Rabbi, Naktina and Hilchas Moed ki Hilchas Shabbos. So he said that in certain ways Chol Moed is like Hilchas Kusim, and now we're saying Hilchas Moed is in certain ways like the laws of Shabbos. So let's continue to Yud Beis and Mud Beis, and perhaps we'll understand what that means. So the Gemara continues, it says as follows. Yesh mehen potter of laser, v'yesh mehen motel chatchila. So when it comes to Shabbos, we know that there's certain times you're not supposed to do things, but you're not going to be chayiv kares. Says Rashi, v'hadeh tani in zoiftin, when it says a person's not allowed to tar up a barrel, asal mevid l'chatchila. Avol b'di'evid lo yihavi chayiv. If you did it, you're not going to be chayiv. V'hadeh tani zoiftin havi motel chatchila. So there's sometimes it says you can't be tar a barrel, and sometimes you could. So it's the same thing. Like on Shabbos, certain things are pater of asr, and some things are mutal chatchila to do. Rav Huna chatzdu le chatzda b'moada. Chatzda he cut wheat. Rashi says hul miktsar liktsor, that he cut this wheat up and he did it on Chol Moed. Eisvi Rabba bar Rav Huna. A person is allowed to cut up and harvest flour on Moed, but it has to be l'tzarech Moed, for the sake of Moed itself. Therefore, it's allowed because you're doing it for the sake of the holiday. Shlo l'tzarech Moed aser. Davar avod b'moed mutter. If there's a monetary loss, then you can do it on Chol Moed. L'asayis b'moed. Davar she'enu avod b'moed aser. If it's not considered davar aved, then it's aser, as we've said many times. Now, b'med devar mamurim. When do we say this? Is b'tilushin. There's only when we're talking about the crop is already cut off; it's detached from the karka. Of a mechuber, if let's say it's still attached, the karka, if you'll cool of an aser, even if your whole intention is to prevent a total loss, because it's still mechuber karka, so that we're already not going to allow you to do, which is obviously a tremendous chumrah. V'im ein lo ma yoichel. So what if you don't have what to eat? So kaitzer u'maimer. So you can harvest. And you can winnow, v'dash, v'zar, v'bayr, v'taychen. You can do all the different things that you need to do to process it, to eventually grind it into flour. But you can't have it threshed with animals. So this is obviously a question. So look at Rashi. Hadetani mechuber afil kul ovad nami yaser. Rav Yossi v'yechidehi lo svirle kavosahu. So this is what the Gemara answers. The question is, how is he allowed to cut? How is Rav Huna able to cut wheat on Chol HaMoed? If it's mechuber, it's aser. So he says that's yechidehi. That's only a das yachid that says that. Lo svirle kavasa. He doesn't hold like that. He holds it as mutter to be done b'makom hefsid. Desanya klal omer Rav Shimon ben Gamliel mishum Rav Yossi davar tolish min karka. If it's detached, I feel mixaso avad mutter. If there's a little bit of a monetary loss, you're still allowed to do it. Again, that's according to this one opinion. This is a das yachin, doesn't hold like him. 1 second. If it's going to Rav Yossi, yodesh nami b'paros, then he should allow you to also use the animals. Because Rav Yossi doesn't hold a shinu is necessary. So then why would he say you can't use the cows or the animals for this? You're right. The truth is, it is not necessary for you to have to do a shinoi. So why does he say the vlad shelo yodesh b'paros? So if that's the case, so kivan the whole yoyim b'paros daishi in the nami lav shinoihu, because this is actually not the normal way. Normally we don't use animals, so therefore today we're also not going to do it that way. Tanabana toichanin b'moyed. What is on to grind up the wheat on Chol Moed aser. Again, if you're doing it and it's not for the needs of the Moed, the festival, then you can't do it. B'im tachan lets you ground up because you need it. But Ha'isir, now you have some leftovers. Harizem mutna, it's allowed. Kaititzin eitzin b'Moed. You're also allowed to cut off branches with Tzarech Moed. Let's say you want firewood, or you want to feed this perhaps to your animals. Shlo Tzarech Moed aser. Harvim katzas. Harizem mutter. If you cut off and there happen to be some left over, then it's okay. Matilin shechar b'moed l'tzarech hamoed. A person is also allowed to complete the process of beer on Chol HaMoed. U'shelo tzarech hamoed aser v'im heitil v'haiser harizem mutter. Again, if you made this beer and happens to be some left over, because you did it for the sake of the moed, it happens to be some left over, it's okay. And then it ends off u'vad shelo yarim. You can't do a trick. In other words, you can't pretend that you make a ton of it so much and you say, oh yeah, I want it for the Chol Moed, and clearly your kavanah is really for another time. Rav chatzda lechatzda b'chol demoada. Now, we mentioned, just like Rav Huna, that Rav also, he cut wheat on Chol Moed. Shama Shmuel, so Shmuel heard that he did this, and Ikbid, he was upset that he did it. L'chayra, you're not allowed to. So Lema Shmuel ki'echidus svirle. So the question is, what's the problem? After all, maybe he holds it's so Lema Shmuel ki'echidus svirle. You should have told him it's that it's a das yachid, therefore I'm allowed to do it. So lo chatzda dechiti havi dolo havi posit. Because he was harvesting wheat. That's something in which is not considered to be a hefsa. Says Rashi, hachi ikbid b'chatzda sari barley lo savla Rav Yossi de aser. He does not hold like Rav Yossi fine. And therefore, there's a chiluk between the harvesting of wheat and barley and the potential of it becoming a loss. But Rab my time of it hachi. So why did Rab do this? Ein lo ma yoichel havi. He didn't have what to eat, and therefore he was allowed to. Shmuel lo yisimuha kamei. But he didn't let him basically finish up the whole thought process. Says Rashi, lo omrulo do we have le ma yoichel hachi ikbid. So that's the reason why he was upset. But the Shmuel should have realized that he just didn't have the ability to eat. So inami adam chashav shani. Again, we find again an adam chashav Rav. He shouldn't have done this. I feel ein lo ma yoichel. Even if he didn't have what to eat, an adam chashav has to be a little bit more careful. Rabbi Huda Nasiya nafik b'chumrata d'medusha. So he went on Shabbos, says Rashi. He had this tabas, this ring shel mateches of metal, v'chol matah shel almoig, and it had this like seal on it, and he walked around on Shabbos with it. The ishti maid achim kfeil arma, and he also drank this warm water as well. So the question is, and it was prepared by someone who's not Jewish. So Shomer of Ami Ikbid, he was upset. He said, you shouldn't have done such a thing. Rabbi Yehuda else, he shouldn't be doing this. So Omer Rav Yosef, my time Ikbid, Imishom Chumrasa de Medusha. Is it because he was upset about this, the whole issue with the ring? Hatanya Hesherim Hanizamim Atabais. There's different types of rings. Harihin Kechol Kalim Hanital B'Chatzer. These are things that could be carried in a courtyard. So, l'chayra, he didn't do anything wrong when it came to the carrying of the ring. If it's an issue of, let's say, bishul akum, because he drank this water, if it's raw, if you can eat it in its raw form, there's no issue of bishul akum. So, since this water, you can drink it and it's fine, heating it up doesn't do anything, so what did he do wrong? The answer is Adam Chashiv Shani. Again, when it comes to Adam Chashiv, we should be more careful. Question 14. Be'elu Beis Devarim Sarach Adam Chashiv L'Hachmir Alpha P Shemin Hadin Mutter Chutz Mamalaches Heter B'Moed. So, as we said, the person should not carry or wear a ring, which a person is not allowed to bring that into the Rosh Hashanah. The Gemara discusses in Masechta Shabbos it cannot go into Rosh Hashanah, but it is allowed to go into a Chatzar, so which is not the level of a Rosh Hashanah. Also, he's not allowed to eat bishul akum, even something that was able to be eaten raw. So things that are really mutter in general, nonetheless, it's not allowed. So those are the two. But the truth is, we also had the other one about how was he able to have someone, let's say, build his house, who was a kabbalan, who was a contractor, even though the question was the problem was chutz l'tchum. So again, we said over there, Adam Chashav is Shani. Okay, weiter. So Rav Chanan Omer Rab Kaitzitz Adam Dekel b'Moed. A person could cut down a day palm tree on Chol Moed. Afav Yisheinu Tzarech Elo L'Nasayir Shelo. All you need is really its wood. Says Rashi, eitzim dakim, these thin pieces of wood, shenaiflim and the chaticha that fall. Lied ala Abaya. But on this, Abai cursed an individual who did this. Ravashi havile abba bishlaino. So Ravashi had this forest. Shalana Rashi says Perush Shem Ha'ir. Just that happens to be the name of the forest. Azo l'miktzeh b'chol demoada. He went to cut down some of the branches on Chol Moed. Amalei Rav Shila Mishalni lo Ravashi. So he said to Ravashi, "My daitach, what is the logic of why he's doing this on Chol Moed? Is it because he heard the heter that you can cut down the day palm tree on Chol Moed? You don't need el and the just for the small piece of wood. Shalo Holaida Abaya, but Abai cursed someone that did that. So why would you want to go against Abaye? So Amalei Lushmili Kaloimo Svirili. No, I don't hold of that. Fine. Ishtamit Narga and the hammer slipped. Boy lemisike lashake. Because of that, it almost cracked his thigh. He almost got injured by this. So shavki v'hader also. So basically, he left. In other words, once he saw that this happened, he realized that perhaps, even though Rav Ashi had a leg to stand on, if you will, but because he saw that he could have gotten injured, perhaps it was due to the curse of Abaye, and therefore he didn't want to do anything. Rabbi Yehuda shari lemeker kisna. Rabbi Yehuda allowed you to uproot flax, lemiktal ketusha, kishusa, and to pull out hops, lemekar shumshimi, to uproot sesames. Amr Rabbi Yosef Bishlam kisna. I can understand the whole notion of you removing the flax on Chol HaMoed Chazil Chafifa. Says Rashi, it's fit l'chasais by Michael going to Einim with Tamarim L'tzar HaMoed, to cover up certain foods like dates and figs. So it has to do with the needs of the Moed. So that flax has a tzarech for the Moed. Keshusa, the hops Chazil Shichra, is fit for beer. So that makes sense. El shum shemil ma'chazi. What's the whole benefit of these seeds? So my answer is chazi lin zoye diisbahu. It's worth it for the, as Rashi says, garinin, the seeds that are inside, and therefore the seeds that are inside the sesames. So therefore that's considered to be lotzarch oichel nefesh, and therefore it's lotzarch hamayim, and therefore it's allowed. Rav Yani Habilei Hahu Pardesa, he had a vineyard, Demata Zimne B'chol Moada, and its time was on Chol HaMoed. In other words, it was ready to be cut at that time. And Katfe, he cut the crop. Lashana, then the next year, Shayuhi Koi Almula Pardesaihu, all the world waited for their vineyards. L'chol Moada Afgare, L'chol Moada. They all waited until Chol HaMoed to do it. So after Rabbi Yanu Pardesa Hu Shata, says Rashi, Mishum de Al Yado Hayat Tekalel Alma. He realized the takala that he caused by taking care of this, even though, as Rashi says, the Shahu Al Chol HaMoed V'Katfe. The truth is, he realized that at that moment before, he was not necessarily doing anything wrong, because that was the time that had to be done. Perhaps it would have been a hefset if he didn't do it. It would have been a monetary loss, never of it. But once everyone saw him do it, so they said, okay, so next year we're going to also wait till Chol Moed. And therefore, because of this, he was mafker his field, so his vineyard, so that he would not have any potential stumbling blocks at all, and also to indicate, to show people that in fact what he did was not necessarily what they should do either. Okay, we're going to stop here. Let's see a couple more questions. TA2 we saw already. Which was the Rashi about the Kaivas. Question 3. Okay, we did this as well. So this is also the exact same daf, which is not typical in a 30-blot test. So in which way do we say that the laws of Chol Moed are like Kusim? Or Inyan Ma Omer Hilchas Moed Ki Hilchas Shabbos. Okay, so let's see this. So this was TA3. So this is, let's see how he writes the answer. That we learn that you can't learn out one from the other. So that was one. And Hilchas Shabbos, sheish mehem pater v'al aser v'yesh mehen mutar l'chadchil, which is actually on Yud Beis and Beis on the top. Yesh mehen pater v'al aser v'yesh mehen mutar l'chadchil. Again, that is TA3. Okay, that's also in Yud Beis and Beis. So I'll make a note of that. TA3. Let's see that Rashi. Fine. TB2. Elochamishu kanasois. So that we did not do. Let's look at question 1. Beis halacha b'davar avid Rav Yossi make of a halacha kamosu. So he said regarding that does not need a shinoi. However, be'ezeh davar Rav Yossi lahachmir machmir v'leiks hilchas kavase. In which way is Rav Yossi strict? The answer is that he says mechuber it is aser, and that we do not hold of. Ad kan.